95, the big station. The Global View on Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from, understanding our past, embracing our present, charting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating poverty, embracing justice, peace, and togetherness. The Global View on Q. Networking Dominica with the rest of the world. The experts are in the house. From Dominica, Canada, the Caribbean, the United States, Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world. Engaging all Dominicans at home and abroad on our agriculture, our economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world-class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q. Only on Q95, the big station.
Good
Good
evening.
evening.
Good evening to you at home or in your vehicle if you are on the road or at work or listening on the radio or on the internet in Dominica or abroad. Thank you for choosing Q95. This is the Global View on Q. A very, very warm welcome to all of our Q family listeners at home and globally. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It is Tuesday, the 27th day of January and the fourth Tuesday of 2026. It's just about 8:05 p.m. in the studios at Q95. Sorry that we're 5 minutes late tonight. We're live on our radio frequencies on QTV. Please follow us on Facebook and on YouTube at Q95 FM Radio. Share the live, like our pages, or on your phone numbers or on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Get the latest breaking news and reviews on Q95 because you know it's true if you hear it on Q. We continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, love, peace, prosperity, and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. It is our second Global View on Q show for 2026, and we continue to engage with our local, regional, and global Q family listeners and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. Tonight with me is Justice Dr. Irving Andre, social scientist Simeon Joseph, former Dominica UN Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, and ENT specialist Dr. Irving I.B. Pascal. We will discuss political leadership over the past 30 years and the impact on the lives of the people of Dominica and the Caribbean. But here are a few questions and issues that we hope to deal with tonight. Historical perspective of political leadership in Dominica and the Caribbean, and the consequences and ultimate outcomes on the people of Dominica and the Caribbean. The qualities of politicians in political leadership and its impact on governance. The rising tide of corrupt leaders in the Caribbean and the enrichment of politicians as a result of being involved in political leadership. We will examine the question, is debauch another betrayal of the people's trust by public servants as it strikes at the heart of the social contract that authorities would act for the common good? Is the debauch debacle a result of poor political leadership? In fact, is Scrapper Hall a better alternative site for stones? Is there a plan to mine for copper in the debauch area? Have we become Buju Banton's island for sale? Is Dominica for sale, or is it in fact being given away for free? Are the people of Dominica and the Caribbean better off over the past 30 years with the new brand of political leadership that exists in Dominica and the Caribbean? Why are political leaders in the Caribbean today so consumed with qualifications over leadership skills and abilities? And is nepotism being displayed by political leaders? And what is the impact of this nepotism on free and fair elections in Dominica and the Caribbean? Have we now sold our law enforcement to the highest bidder? Have we sacrificed it to serve our sins of selfishness and greed? Have we conspired to make a suspected murderer escape the hands of justice? Have we sold our criminal justice system to remain in the good books of the US? And what is the future of Venezuela, the Chinese, and the Cubans in Dominica and the Caribbean? So we look forward to the contributions of Justice Dr. Irving Andre, social scientist Simeon Joseph, former Dominica UN Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, ENT specialist Dr. Irving I.P. Pascal, and callers and viewers on the radio, Facebook, and on YouTube on political leadership in Dominica and the Caribbean over the past 30 years and its impact on the lives of the people. So, as usual, we invite you, our Q family friends of Dominica, to help us give our usual huge shout out and a big thank you to our farmers, our healthcare providers, our frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, and public and private sector patriots and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. And as I always say, we welcome each and every Dominican and friend of Dominica to the Global View on Cue. We embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village, in every community at home in Dominica, in the region and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, for keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, on the console, directing the traffic. We will take your calls. As you know, the people's voice is always a priority on Q and on the Global View on Q. So call us anytime during the program, and Lambi will signal us when you call. My co-host, Justice Dr. Irvin Andre, and guests and panelists will expand and deliver on their own ideas. So I go now to Justice Dr. Irving Andre for his opening comments on political leadership over the past 30 years in Dominica and the Caribbean and its impact on the lives of the people of Dominica. Let's get the ball rolling, Dr. Andre. I think you're muted, so you need to unmute.
Good evening to the esteemed panelists. Let me thank you for welcoming the port to your program. Let me welcome the listeners who are here this evening. Let us welcome Brother Lambi and Sherwin in the background. Let us start by saying and acknowledging that this is a day the Lord has made. Let us be glad and rejoice, irrespective of how cold it is, irrespective of how bleak the landscape, irrespective of the difficulties we have to contend with in Dominica. On account of the rape of the landscape, once again, it is still a wonderful day to be alive. Now, we cannot talk about the leadership in the last 30 years without at least having a very brief discussion of the leadership that preceded it. And in terms of the leadership that preceded it as a general proposition, there is a qualitative difference between that cadre of leadership and what exists right now. I mean, if we think in terms of, for example, Eric Williams of Trinidad and Tobago, we think of Norman Washington Manley and even Alexander Bustamante of Jamaica. If we think of Bradshaw, well, again, we don't have to go into it, of St. Kitts. If we think of Joshua from St. Vincent, we think of Barrow from Barbados. We think of Edward Oliver LeBlanc. There are others, Eric Gary, and we'll have a little more to say about that because that sets the stage for what transpired after that generation of leadership. And in a sense, V.C. Byrd of Antigua. That leadership, for the most part, as a general proposition, was focused on achieving or so-called breaking the bonds of colonialism. You may remember that in the 50s, Eric Williams coined the phrase Massa de Done. There was a struggle for that. At one time in the early 50s, political liberation was thought to be achieved through a West Indies Federation. There was a federation in 58. It collapsed, we all know, in 1962. And thenceforth, each island embarked on its own separate path. The four small islands tried to cobble a contraption, a political contraption made famous by, Sir Lewis, called the Little Eight. It funded, and after it funded, each island embarked on its own path to political independence. Dominica attained its own, as we all know, in 1978. And then we've had a set of leaders afterwards. Our leader of that generation was Edward Oliver LeBlanc, a social democratic leader, for God's sakes. His primary focus was to uplift the fate or the conditions of the working population in Dominica. It didn't hurt that his antecedents, his background was from the country. He associated wealth generation with agricultural production, and that was his mission. He had a mission to empower his people, not his pocket, his people. And we benefited as a society. We benefited because in the 60s in particular, a significant number of persons from the impoverished neighborhoods throughout Dominica's countryside, they had an opportunity to gain an education. I met many of these folk at the Dominica Grammar School, in particularly in the early 70s. Road development, stimulants to the agriculture, to the economy, opening positions for persons in terms of the civil service, increasing the number of scholarships to persons who showed that they had the ability to proceed. And that was a period, quite frankly, where there was significant progress and development in terms of Dominica. Now, if we measure development, not in terms of these big buildings that you erect all over the place, not in terms of the erection of hotels that have 10% occupancy rate, not in terms of hotels that cannot be finished, not in terms of disappearing money, but people's development, people empowerment. If we measure development as a yardstick of people's development, then we achieved a significant amount of development in those years, whether it's under Edward Oliver LeBlanc, whether it's under Patrick John, whether it's under the Freedom Party administration from 1980 to 1995. These were halcyon days in Dominica's development. Unfortunately, the end of that honeymoon started in 2000, and we know what happened. Rosie unfortunately won the elections. He passed away 9 months afterwards, and suffice it to say, there was a change of leadership, and the whole paradigm shifted to Dominica's detriment. But this is not what's only unique to Dominica, because the cadre of that leadership, they had to contend with different forces. We had attained political independence. We were looking for economic independence. How do we achieve that? A small country like Dominica? Do we continue the tendency or the trend of empowering the people? Probably getting new markets for your agricultural products, developing an agro industry? No, on the contrary. Over the last 30 years, there's been a significant decline and regression in terms of those aspects of production that would empower Dominicans. We became consumed by those get-rich-quick schemes, consumed by consumerism, consumed by the monies gained from two central activities, both of them illegal. The sale of your passports, typically to the highest bidder, and secondly, the drug corridor from Latin America through the islands to Europe and the United States. The islands were consumed by the effects of these two pernicious activities. And we're not talking about drug peddlers on the streets of Roseau or in some Coué somewhere. We're talking about at the highest stages of governance. You can't deny it again. It's right there. Let me give you just a snippet of the picture that emerges in terms of the leadership that we've had in the last decades. In one island, the Integrity Commission of that island discovered that the Prime Minister had 28 personal accounts with unexplained deposits in many of these accounts. We know that in that recent indictment filed in the Bronx in respect to Maduro, the indictment alleges that certain Caribbean leaders aided and abetted and were paid to establish that drug corridor from Venezuela to United States and to Europe. We know that a former leader, West Indian leader, was stopped in the United Kingdom at the airport when it was found that he had an undisclosed approximately $60,000 US in his person. I guess there must have been a garage sale in England for him to have so much money hanging around the place. We also know that the BVI premier was convicted of drug trafficking and money laundering and sentenced to 11 years in custody in Miami a few years ago. We know that similarly, a member of parliament in Barbados was convicted of a similar type of offense. We know that every report you check, you search or research on the internet will make mention of shell companies and offshore accounts being used to facilitate the illicit transference of dirty money. We know that a news agency called Al Jazeera conducted a clandestine interview with some of our leaders and the associate of somebody called Alfared, Alireza Monfared, who found sanctuary in Dominica, aided and abetted by those who had the closest ties to the political directorate. Described these fellows as what again? Hungry hyenas. I would have said manicus, but you know he's a foreigner. He said hyenas. We know that one of the problems here is the existence or presence of wealth which cannot be explained by a legitimate means of income. A few years ago, a journalist called Matt something Peltier wrote an article. What was it again? $5,000 monthly salary, $1 million assets. Now you would have to multiply that by tens and tens and tens to reflect the true reality of the illegal accumulation of wealth in Dominica. But it's not only typical of Dominica. But not only that, it's not just a matter of money. It's that everything is for sale. Well, actually, you know, I'm wrong. Probably I'm misquoting Buji Banton. Everything is for free. Because if, Mr. G, you sell 9 or 10 of your passports, you know it was sold. They were sold. But none of the proceeds of sale came back into the consolidated fund. You know that from the perspective of Dominicans, they were for free. We know the desecration at around Purple Turtle going to the Cabrits. And we'll come to that because we're going to talk tonight. That neck of land, 15 acres of land was given to a foreign consortium to build a hotel, protected lands. And let me say something aside. You may not remember it, but we're going to come to it. You know that one of our local historians basically shrugged it up and say, so what? Paraphrasing. And I remember Athimate Laye. Athimate said that person will have to deal with his conscience, but we'll come to that just now. Well, for free. And guess what? After the hotel was built and after just one agent got $30 million, there was $30 million for another agent. We know it was sold. And again, it was no longer owned by Dominicans. So again, that 15 acres was for free. We know, for example, the sale of diplomatic passports to crooks and criminals. The evidence is out there. Only sycophants would deny it. And guess what? Most of the monies paid for these passports, diplomatic or otherwise, were not deposited into the consolidated fund. So whereas countries like St. Kitts were boasting about the $25,000, the Christmas bonus or whatever it was, some Dominicans could only boast of a brown paper bag. And those who were not aligned with the political directorate got nothing, shamelessly. And some of the biggest psychopaths were pastors, for God's sakes, driving in their tinted SUVs like little monkeys. They don't see, they don't hear, they don't smell. That's what's happening. We know leaders buying a $160,000 car to take their child to school, Mr. G. And a few years ago, during COVID, nurses were begging for a ride to go to the hospital, Gasson. And if I have an illness and I have to go to the hospital, I have to go and look in some old suitcase of my mother to see if she has any bottle of Mocurochrome I could use at the hospital to take care of myself. That's how bad things are. While these leaders, these Gucci socialists, they love to call themselves comrade. What a bunch of hypocrites. If they have a bobo let me apologize to Dr. IP. I don't know the medical term. They fly out. And you have certain leaders, Mr. G, I can't remember the names, who are boasting. I have my insurance though. And some of the psychopaths, they clap. You panic. But they're clapping that the leader who's living off the hog is boasting that he has insurance. The head of a regional bank in the islands built a $22 million mansion to live. $22 million mansion to live. Another leader has no problem. He sees nothing wrong in living in a mansion. The payment of rent being borne by taxpayers to the tune of $64,000 a month. A March 2023 article in the London Guardian newspaper is headlined, Corruption in the Caribbean has been normalized. And therein lies the problem. It has been normalized. But the only thing which has changed in the last few years is that it is no longer a secret. So whereas a few years ago we talked about the garbage bin ball and all these kinds of things and so on, it did not, for the most part, go beyond the shores of Dominica. They can't hide now. The United Kingdom has imposed restrictions on visas. The United States has done the same thing and put Dominicans on a list effective January 21. There'll be a suspension of these visas. And I wouldn't be surprised they take even more drastic steps. The Europeans, you may recall, Mr. G, on or about June of 2025, issued a 5 or 6 point publication indicating the changes they believe that these islands who sell passports have to make to legitimize their activities. The critical one, the net proceeds of sale of passports should be deposited into the consolidated fund. Are you kidding me, Mr. G? Deposited into the consolidated fund? But that is the source of the monies which are being stolen. Remember what who was Ralph Gonzalez again? Was he from Soufriere? Which one was that? Oh no, that's the one from St. Vincent. What did he say? He said they love it because they're thieving the money. Now, when he came to Dominica, he didn't say that. But he made sure he said that because the opposition party in St. Vincent was supportive of the sale of passports. So it is known that this is activity that has corrupted and polluted the political landscape right here in Dominica and elsewhere in the Eastern Caribbean. This is why you have a club among these fellas. You know, these Labour Party administrations, they scratch each other's back. In the recent election in St. Vincent, some lawyer called Tony. Now, I read somewhere, or as my father would say, so I heard he won't go away to Miami because he doesn't want to be there if the dam bursts. Turns out, they go along helping each other because they're comrades in arms. And remember what the U.S. said. Some Caribbean politicians have been co-conspirators with Maduro. But that would probably explain a lot of things in Dominica, wouldn't it? The frenzy in terms of building hotels. Probably the one which is doing the best is Fort Young. Well, they've always been, that hotel has always been very well run. But the vast majority, they cannot justify the expenses to maintain and to run these hotels on the basis of occupancy. So the raison d'etre is very clear. The purpose is not to engage in productive economic activity, but the purpose is to hide the bread. and then sell the hotel somewhere, which is because that is the finishing stage of the money laundering process. And this is where we are in Dominica as we speak. Now, Mr. G, you may have heard this hue and cry about, oh, we complied with the US. And some of the psychometrists said, oh, well, it's only the residency components that the US was concerned about is true. Are you kidding me? It's only the register. And a turned journalist who is now a born-again pagan said, it is not the CBI that caused the US to take these steps. Well, what it is? Because that is the pattern. And here is another insidious threat to our democracy. The buying of persons of conscience. Persons of conscience selling their souls, singing the song of those who are robbing the state blind. And that might explain the controversy about debauch. But Mr. G, if you want me to stop now, I will, but I will have more to say about that. Because the debauch is a mere continuation of what we are speaking of. Untold corruption, destroying not just the body politic, but the island itself.
Well, yes, and maybe I should bring in IP now, but I think I will save IP for a little bit later, because IP has a lot to give us about debauch and all of what the machinations that's going on there. I'd like to go to Simeon, our social scientist, Simeon Joseph. Simeon, you've heard Dr. Andre. He's given us a great background of what's been going on in the politics. Give us your thoughts on what is really going on in there now.
So good night, Mr. Joseph, Mr. Gregoire, Mr. Crispin Gregoire. Well, the two Gregoires. First time I'm on the program with you, Crispin. So pleasure to be with you here tonight. And of course, IP2, and of course, Dr. Andre and Lambie and those in the background, good night. I think, Mr. Gregoire, you've asked some very pertinent questions and very poignant questions of us tonight. You have what you call it, darted some 13 questions to us tonight, which raises a myriad of thoughts in the process. I would want to be very realistic in my presentation tonight, but also I think they need to be very philosophical in terms of the whole understanding of political leadership. Because, I certainly would like to begin by endorsing some of the names that Dr. Andre mentioned tonight. And your topic tonight evokes that question. It evokes in us the need to compare. And because the question we have to ask is, throwing my mind back to a book that we all did in primary school and early secondary school, The Great West Indians. And through the pages of that book, we were invited, we were sort of ushered into our understanding of greatness and many other things by reading the lives of many of those great West. I don't know if do you guys remember that book at all?
Yeah, I remember it.
Okay, well, and Miss Dr. Andre alluded to some of them tonight. So the question we have to ask in the context of the question that you're asking is there a leadership crisis in the Caribbean today? When we think of, and I'll mention the names just for endorsement, people like Eric Williams of Trinidad, Errol Barrow, Grantley Adams of Barbados. Now, I know they were mentioned before. John Compton and E.T. Joshua of St. Vincent, Milton Cato, James Mitchell, St. Vincent, Bradshaw and Southwell from St. Kitts, Norman Manley and Bustamante from Jamaica, Eoli Blanc, Frank Barron and V.C. Bird, and all these people in the Caribbean who inspired many things in leadership. These people inspired a certain level of confidence among the Caribbean people. They created a certain level of respect and reverence for leadership, because we're talking about leadership, political leadership. They imbued a sense of larger than life figures that people could see them as the epitome of greatness. They were courageous and decisive for the Caribbean people. That what they did on the landscape of the various countries in the Caribbean was to be very transformational, ushering in a new vision and a new dimension of what their people ought to be, or what Caribbean people ought to be. They were courageous and decisive, and they would communicate in ways that made it clear as to what they stood for. And they had that long-term vision. That's why when we think back and we think of leadership, these are the qualities that we have to think of in terms of political leadership in order to compare the kind of political leaders that we have today. And who today have created in many of the Caribbean people distrust in the lack of leadership that Caribbean people enjoy nowadays. That they base their policies mainly on popularity, how popular they can be. And they will do anything to make themselves popular and to be admired for all the wrong reasons, not for what they have done, but how they can aggrandize themselves. So we have people, for instance, with false doctorates, calling themselves doctor, and allowing other academia, people of knowledge, educationists, people who know better, to fall into that trap of discrediting academic accreditations by calling people doctor only to aggrandize them. So it's their greatness is being created to a sense of being popular, you know, and making them aggrandizing themselves and fearful of the donor base, the people who have the largesse. So our generation, I think, is losing that, and society today is losing that cultural context of leadership. But philosophically, and I must go there tonight as a student of political science, if we have to examine what political leadership is about, and I'm hoping, and I think in that program, because of the dearth and the gap of an understanding by many people today, politicians given, the populace, those who elect people in public office, those who aspire to public office, those who hold public office, or even those who follow political leaders, seem to me that they don't understand what is political leadership. And I think this has invited me, as I said, as a student, to look at political leadership in context and to see, to a very large extent, when we talk about political leadership and comparing political leaders of before to political leaders now, what is our understanding in terms of political science that helps us to deal with political leadership? Because political leadership doesn't exist in a vacuum. Political leadership is an essential feature for governance and government. That's why people go to political office. People don't go to political office for themselves. They don't go for popularity, you know. And so when we look at the kind of political leadership we have today, and the fact that there is not that understanding what is the essentiality of political leadership, we find a new generation of weak leadership that has contributed to government failures, and not realizing that strong leadership is indispensable if government is to succeed. There is a lack of understanding that wise political leadership secures prosperity in the long term, and foolhardy political leadership may bring about a catastrophe to people and islands as we are seeing today. Because the Caribbean people today are going down a very catastrophic trait. When we look at how prosperous and most specifically progressive of how Caribbean people were today, and that's why I mentioned the names of these people earlier, how progressive and prosperous Trinidad became under Eric Williams, how prosperous and progressive Jamaican became under Norman Manley and Alexander Bustamante, how progressive and prosperous St. Kitts became under Bradshaw, how progressive and prosperous St. Lucia became under Compton, and the list goes on, how progressive Dominica became under Eolibla. So the lack of leadership routinizes governance, and the political and creative aspects fades away. And so today we find that the real essence of politics has been diminished, and most specifically, the creativity of governance of political leaders has totally been obliterated and faded away. And it becomes no different from administrations focusing solely on a pattern maintenance and repetition of the same, which is what we are seeing. So they'll do anything to maintain and to stay in power and to strengthen the status quo. And we'll find, on the other hand, that we have a lot of political leaders today who act out of a sudden impulse, who create unexpected changes, who disrupt the normal flow of the political process, and who in essence distracts from transparency and a certain level of predictability. That's why we have to look at it. There are many ways in which we need to look at political leadership, which has no doubt created a new phenomenon in the Caribbean islands today that creates more sense of rivalry, lack of cohesive and productive change, not allowing people to understand the right to develop themselves. So we have a high level of begging and mendicancy, that we have a lot of controversies of all sorts, human rights controversies, trade-off controversies, security controversies, civil controversies, political controversies of political rights that are essentially becoming new cultural norms, so to speak, of the political leaders that we have today. Allow me to quote the Oxford English Dictionary for a moment, that defines a leader as a person who leads or commands a group, an organization, or a country. And so what that means is that to lead means to cause, to go with one by drawing them along, to show, and to bring them to a certain destination by preceding or accompanying them. And these two words to me is what I see as a very frightening situation by the kind of leaders we have today, because our leaders today do not lead. They don't precede any condition as to where they would like their people to be. If you look at any of the current leaders today, from Trinidad to Grenada, St. Vincent, and God forbid Dominica, Antigua, St. Kitts, none of these leaders inspire a certain level of confidence in people that would tell them, okay, this is the destination that I want to lead you, and you precede me and you accompany me there. All of these people are for themselves. So what kind of goal setting and motivation that people of the Caribbean today are getting from the kind of leaders that we have today? That has led, to my mind, to a certain diminishing of the dignity of the office or position of leaders that we have today, especially of political parties, with the ability to lead the position of a group or of people, leading or influencing them within a given context, within their space, within their boundaries, within their seashores, and to ensure that they create a certain level of action or influence that is necessary for the direction of our people to go. When you analyze really what political leadership is about, political leadership, allow me to say, carries with it certain personality traits of a leader, including their ethical and cultural character. That is something severely lacking in many of our leaders today. They lack ethics. Their character is flawed. If you follow them and you look at them, they lack any moral compass. Or most people of sane minds cannot see any cultural orientation in them, like people like Mr. Libla. You know what his cultural character and orientation was. You could know that for Mr. Barrow. You could know that for Eric Williams. You could know that for the leaders. You could know that for Eugenia Charles. You could know that because these people had a sound ethical and cultural character that inspired people to understand what they were about. Political leaders have certain traits and ethical, cultural characters of the follower with whom the leader interacts. Keeping in mind that leaders of different followers have to interact cooperatively or competitively. And that is what is lacking. There's a lack of willingness by political leaders today to cooperate with. Some of them don't even know how to cooperate within their own cabinets, among their own ministers. And you're seeing a new sort of germination of semi-dictators, or even to learn how to compete effectively. And so therefore you have all these shenanigans that go on during election. Political leaders must understand the organizational context within which they interact, political culture, the climate, and the norms of institutions for which they're going to serve. And if they don't do that, governments will fail. And we have to understand that the nature of any leader's interpretive judgment will define the insights that are accepted by their followers. So you will see a number of followers of political leaders today talking nonsense. I just saw a video today, somebody saying if you talk about the PM, your mouth will burst. If I hear you talking about the PM, your mouth will burst. This is the kind of followers that many of our leaders today inspire. People who will do anything. I mean, we may say that the United States is far flung, but many people, which is what is disturbing me, many Caribbean politicians and people of so-called sense are very upset by what Donald Trump is doing in the United States today. But they endorse the very same attitudes and mindsets and usherings of Donald Trump in the local leaders. These are some very frightening things that we have to say. So political leadership, I mean, overlaps significantly in terms of in many areas as to where we want to look at it. There is, of course, the analytical framework of political leadership, and that means that has to do with the ability of political leaders to interpret problems properly, healthily, to prescribe ends and means to solve them. That's part of leadership. That's part of political leadership. To propagate visions and solutions and proper responses to problems, and to mobilize their followers to implement those solutions or responses in a healthy way. Many of our political leaders today lack that sort of analytical context to be political leaders. And so, Mr. Gregoire, when we think about all what is being said and the questions that you pose to us, I would surmise or very much underscore the current problem that we have today. That unfortunately Dominica and the Caribbean today lacks a certain level of political leadership that will give the people of the Caribbean a certain confidence that the Caribbean that we knew 30 years ago, the Dominica that we knew 30 years ago, can come back, or we can regain some sense of hope in terms of things. You know, in the philosophy of understanding of the types of leaders, basically they tell you there are, and I want to touch on that, there are three types of leaders. There's the leader, the leader which numbers one, and the leader which numbers the few, and the leader which numbers the many. Of course, the leader who sees themselves as one and only, see themselves as kings, and they will rule with a certain level of tyranny, as we see in some countries of the Caribbean. I thought when we got rid of Gary and Burnham in Guyana, etc., these days were over. It seems as though they are coming back. Or we have the governance of a few, which creates a certain level of aristocracy before the days of Mr. Lee Bland, when we had our crown colony, which created a sort of oligarchic environment for the few, and then an understanding of the government by the many, which is what democracy is about. So the normative typologies that we have of leadership today tells us that we have to try to understand what is the meaning of good leadership. What are the goals? What are the means? What are the consequences of good leadership? Because the goal of good leadership is to balance realism and risk in vision, values, and intentions and goals. And the means to which you get there has to be through efficiency of means to an end, which would usher in a certain level of quality. And then the consequences would be success in achieving good for the people. So we'll have good results and groups. Are we achieving those things today? I don't think so, because the kind of leaders that we have today do not give us, are not providing for their people goals that are real, with vision and good intentions, and not achieving those things through proper means, efficiency, and means to an end. Dr. Andre talk about those things. So it's all about CBI or Petrocarib, or sometimes you're hearing now the involvement of them in drugs and bribery and all sorts of cheap means of achieving quality. So we will compromise anything, and we'll sell our souls to the devil, and we will engage in arrangements where the people are in the dark. You know, there was a question that was asked about Irish bishops some time ago. How do you teach your faithful? They say you grow them in the dark like mushrooms, and you send a whole lot of shit over them. That's how our leaders today tend to think, that their population, they can leave them in the dark, they can throw anything at them, and they can give them the most inferior, most ineffective, and they can shortchange them and cheat them of anything of the country, and they think that is what leadership is. And the people, unfortunately, are taking that. And of course, we see as a result of that, the lack of success of many of our people. The lack of good results of many of our people. And the list goes on. Just look at Dominica again, the decline of productivity, the decline of manufacturing, the massive brain drain of our people, the dwindling of small business and entrepreneurship, the total decimation of the agricultural sector, the dismantling of the government system, the almost lack of confidence in the health system, the expensive and high level of inflation as Dominican are going through, the low level of employment, the high level of underemployment, the destruction of our young men on the side of the street, the massive use of drugs in the country, the rising of corruption. All of those things are as a result of the lack of proper leadership that we continue to be subject to in Dominica and the rest of the Caribbean.
Well, thank you for that first, your introductory remarks there, Simeon. You said a mouthful, and I know that you have more to come. We will get a lot more on the whole question of political leadership from former Ambassador Crispin Gregoire when I go to him. But I want to just go to ENT specialist Dr. Irving I.P. Pascal, because I did raise the question a little earlier in my opening remarks. We said we would examine is debauch another betrayal of the public's trust by public servants, as it strikes at the heart of the social contract that authorities would act for the common good. And is debauch the debacle a result of poor political leadership? In fact, is Crapo Hall a better alternative site for stones in the circumstances? And is there a plan to mine for copper in the debauch area? I raised all those things that I thought it would give some food for thought to Dr. IP, because I know that Dr. IP, you've been standing your ground up in the debauch area. And so if you could unmute your mic now so you could deal with some of those things for us.
All right. Hi, good evening, everyone, and greetings. It's a pleasure and an honor to share the podium. Well, not the podium. What do you call this?
The panel.
The meeting, the panel with our panel of Dominican patriots, as I call them. Before going into the debauch issue, or saying my piece or commenting on that, I would just like to maybe make one or two comments on the political leadership. I claim no expertise in the area, neither from studying or from personal experience. And my comments will be restricted to Dominica, or Ma Dominique, as I like to call her. I'm kind of, biased and prejudiced, so my comments will not be directed at the other Caribbean islands. But talking about political leadership in Dominica over the last 30 years, I basically have two comments. I would say that political leadership that I have witnessed over the last 30 years has become increasingly unable to deliver on the expectations of the people who elect them, and improve things in a way that people can feel that they have increased ability to survive and prosper. So that would be the characteristic of the leadership I've seen in Dominica over the last 30 years. The other characteristic I can give to the political leadership in Dominica over the last 30 years, especially in the last 20 years, is an increasing authoritarian approach to leadership locally, whilst at the same time being increasingly handicapped to deal with global players. And that's the evolution of the political leadership in Dominica. Now, I accept that all political leadership in Dominica has always been, to a certain extent, we have a system where the elected politician is really an elected authoritarian, because once they get elected, we don't have any systems in place to keep them in check. We hardly have even systems in place to keep them accountable. And so in effect, they are elected authoritarians. So they get in there, they win the elections, and they go in there and they do what they want. You can hardly stop them. There is nothing in our system that allows us to say, well, we don't like this. The positions that should have helped us in that regard, like the ombudsman or the presidency, the ombudsman isn't there, and the presidency doesn't even think it has a moral authority to intervene on our behalf. So that authoritarianism was always there to me from Libla and all these great guys back then, but it has become increasingly, what I would say, malignant more recently. So that's how I would characterize the evolving political leadership in Dominica. And I think this is particularly acutely felt in Dominica because of the absence in our system of another type of leadership in our democratic system. And that's the leadership of civil society, the free press, and the judiciary. So I would tend to say that this increase in impotence in political leadership is also a direct result or intimately related to the failure of the what's the word? Like the failure of these other aspects. These are the three aspects of the democracy to lead. And in Dominica, we know for sure in the last 15, 20 years, that civil society leadership, freedom of the press, and judiciary has been practically absent, the leadership from those sectors. And they would be just as responsible, to my mind, for the nature of the political leadership we have now. Because if we take the present Prime Minister, when he started, whoever was his handlers, because I couldn't imagine he was his own handler at the time, that aspect of the civil society, they did, to me, they failed in their regard, in that regard, to behave in a way or to exercise leadership as civil society to contain and balance this sort of, I don't want to say, well, monster we've created. And I think it's because of the absence of that. So I'm saying that to say, because I'm not only thinking about this poor leadership, if you want to call it that we have. I'm thinking about what do we do about it? How do we fix it? Because that's the most important thing for the ordinary Dominican right now. We have this poor leadership. How are we fixing that? What are we going to do about it? I mean, my own views are, well, you know, my own views might be a little bit radical, but that, for me, that is the concern. And one of the things to do something about it is for those other sectors of the democracy to step up and lead in their own areas. And I mean, and why I say that is interesting, because this week, for example, we had 2 articles written by Gregor Nassif. And for me, that is the role that has been absent in the civil society for the last 15 to 20 years. And that's understandable, because, and to show you how it has switched to the political leaders, you can't even say anything without it being categorized as being pro-government or anti-government. How can that be? It's ridiculous. So it tells me how far we've gone, where I can raise an issue about, well, what's happening at Debosch. And the acolytes of the ruling party, the first thing they can tell me is that I'm being political and I don't want an airport to be built. I mean, so it's that type of absence, I think, of a counter leadership or accompanying leadership that is just as much as fault for the type of political leadership we have, in my view. And since I'm a man that I believe in is what do I do about it? What do I do about my challenges, or what do I do about my problems? And I think what we have to decide now, for those of us who are here now and for the future, is that what do we do about this political leadership that's present in Dominica right now? And I think it's simple. I mean, the present political leadership may have even made it difficult for them to help us in that regard, because the simplest thing to do would have been to call an election and lose it. And then that's it. You know, life is easy. But the fact that the whole electoral process has been so corrupted, or it's been, the ability to steal it has been so perfect, the present leadership cannot even depend on that to get out of the scrape they're in, because the pit they dug for the opposition forces or for the other political parties. They now, it's like they should abduct two, or they abduct two, because they can't even use that to say, well, let me call a quick election and lose, and I'll leave that for these guys to sort themselves out. So what do we do? And for me, it's either resign or be made to resign. Simple as that. I mean, it's what do we do about this poor political leadership and go forward from there. And I would put it on the table that that's maybe the only option to the present poor political leadership. And I think what we should do is get that to happen. It would be nice if they just resigned. I mean, that'd make it nice and easy for everyone. But in any case, the people are not going to be able to change that leadership, because that leadership hasn't addressed or properly addressed electoral reform. So it's going to happen anyways. The people are going to have to find a way, when they get fed up of you, for you to go. And I think that's what we should concentrate on now, and put something in place like we did in '79, a Committee for National Salvation, or a Government of National Unity that is primarily composed of technocrats for a period of 3 to 4 years, 2 to 3 years, to sort of what I would call stabilize this rot in the society, or this hemorrhage of everything, to do the electoral reform, and to set the stage where we can, what they like to say, they call it what? They use it the last time. Reset the political leadership in Dominica. I think that's what all I have to say about that now. That what that interim group could do is start to see what they can do to find our money wherever it is, if there's any left, and let's move on for the future. Because I can come here and say, but I'm saying, for me, it's more important that what am I doing? What can be done? What can Dominicans do about, because it's that poor political leadership that's threatening Ma Dominique Adebosh right now. It's that amputated leadership that doesn't seem to know what it's doing, that doesn't seem to be sovereign, that seems to be handled by people who have no allegiance, no conscience for Ma Dominique. So I'm saying whatever happens at Debosh, or whatever can happen at Debosh, is directly related to the present political leadership we have. Because you cannot tell me you have a political leadership now that can allow illegal mining to occur in the heart of the country, to put at risk the future, let's suppose the future prosperity of the country in that way, and to destroy what it is we say we are, or what is it we're supposed to be keeping for the future people who are going to occupy this place. And if you can do that, and if you can, at a basic level, go into that kind of enterprise that either saves the country millions of dollars or makes millions of dollars for other people, and the people who own that land that you're using to do that, you can give them a lease for 3 years, not pay them fully the lease. And when they get back their land in 3 years, there'll be no soil there. How can you do that? I mean, what kind of Dominican does that? So for me, it can't be a Dominican doing that. I could never give that identity to the person doing that. There is no way a Dominican, I don't care who you are. And then to make it worse, I was made aware that one of the sort of relatives, somebody who was farming the land, was getting his living from those three acres that were leased. He is given he doesn't get paid for his property that he was farming, but he gets a job as a security officer on the site for $8 an hour. I mean, come on. If there was any even concern for Dominican, I mean, it's bad enough we can see the disrespect and the whatever for Dominicans, the way they approach to this whole process at Deboche. They don't care for this. It's only when people make an uproar, things like the road and the dirt in the road and what's happening to the rivers is addressed. So that tells me, well, how can I trust the people who's supposed to be in charge of this piece of rock? So I'll leave it there for now.
Yes, thanks a lot, IP. I believe that a little earlier when you alluded to the problems in leadership, I think we can agree that many of the institutions that's supposed to support a democracy have been compromised. I mean, the free organization, for example, the IPO, I mean, the Public Service Commission, the Police Service Commission, the Electoral Commission, all these institutions that's supposed to safeguard our political interests, these have all been compromised and they've been weakened. And so now I believe IP that out of the dilemma of Deboche, wouldn't it be a solution to just move that site to Crapo Hall and maybe just add 3 months to the length of time that you're going to take to make the airport, and to add maybe a couple of $1 million extra cost for that, and then just get rid of that problem?
Yeah, well, that's common sense. I mean, it's obvious that there doesn't seem to be much common sense at play in what's happening at Deboche, because if we are saying, if what the authorities are saying, although it's difficult for me to accept anything the authority says now, if I give them the benefit of the doubt, and the issue is that at least that's what the stones that are needed now, because there was an injunction put at Crapo Hall that was now going to extend the time needed, that because you had restricted hours for the mining at Crapo Hall. That's the reason why, or that's one of the reasons why they had to go to Deboche. I'm saying, but why would you take down a whole mountain and put the rivers and everything at risk, and the livelihoods of all these people in Concord and the Kalinago territory at risk? Why would you do that? And all you had to do was accept and say, well, we're gonna have to spend more time at Crapo Hall. So the project, instead of it finishing in 6 months, it will finish in a year. I mean, that's simple and straightforward, and it's easy to compute that. You know how many hours you've lost. You know how much it's going to cost you, and it's easy to put a cost on that. But whatever cost that is, the cost to the country, if you want to look at it that way, would be minuscule compared to the cost of losing those mountains and hills and valleys, these things we're supposed to extol at Deboche. So why that isn't done, I don't know. If it's an issue of the stone, that the other excuse that's being given is that the stone there is better. I mean, but come on, we're in 2026. You're going to come and tell people that the stone there is better without showing them the scientific data to support that, when everybody who goes there asking, where is the stone, much as for you, people can't even see stone there when they go there. I'm asking, where is the stone, much less for you to get better stone. You don't even have stone there. You have to, well, from what the experts have said, you have to dig down 1,000 feet to get the stone. I mean, so it doesn't seem to me to add up. It only leads to a further distrust of what the authorities concerned are sharing with the public, and it really speaks to an increasing distrust, because the way, I mean, my being at Daywash, the way things are operating there, you just feel that the foreign folks who are there have impunity to do what they want. That's the impression I get. That no law, no constitution in Dominica can stop them from doing what they want. So that's why I say it's going back to that approach to our development and our prosperity, no law, no constitution, because the just the way that they're going about things, you do it illegally, you get a stop order, you still continue to work even if there's a stop order. So it's a total disregard for the rules and regulations and the laws of the country. So it's like either you have some impunity to do these things, or you own the place, or it's your country. So the question for me is that maybe Daywash is sold, as you said in one of your things. Is Dominica for sale? Maybe it's not for sale. Maybe it's already sold. So, and that's why I think it forces me to reflect on maybe the root of all my distrust, and I'm supposed of others, which is this issue of the memorandum of understanding or government signed with the Chinese in 2004, 2005. That if you remember what happened, that the government officials came back and said they had done what they had done, and then it took them a year to provide something that two pieces of paper without any letterhead, and so as far as I understand, and no signatories at the bottom, with no detail. Well, I suppose memorandum of understanding don't necessarily have to be detailed. Before, that was sort of shared quickly, but there is no way I can go now and get it or get a copy of it. So when I say the betrayal, increasing betrayal of trust, it goes right back to 2004, because it's the same players who are involved there. It's the same players who are involved there. So I think I don't.
All right, IP. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that. Now I have to go to former Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, but before I do, it's now 9:15. Lambi, you want to just give our listeners the numbers so they can give us a call and share with us for a minute before I go over to former Ambassador Crispin Gregoire.
The Global View on Q. We're taking your calls right now. The numbers are as follow: 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. Those are local numbers. The international number is 305-432-9624. Let me run those numbers one more time. 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. Those are all local numbers. And the international or overseas number, 305-432-9624. And we have a call already. Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good evening, Lambert. Good evening to all the panel.
Good evening.
And, the discussion has been ongoing for so many years. And as one of your panel members stated, things are getting crucial. It's like, we talked about all the illegal passports that were issued, for example. And I want to know, I want it nailed down. I don't want it to be vague. I want to know, and I believe the Dominican people should know, who authorized the issuance of these passports when the candidate failed. The candidate failed the due diligence process, which Mr. Skerrit told us was Loctite, was iron safe. Yet these people received passports. Did someone collect money under the table? And who is that someone who said, issue the passports? Because that person should stand before a court. What is wrong with our police? How can someone do such an illegal act and no recourse from the law? Now, that point put aside, let's go to Mr. Skerritt's escapades. We spoke about all the hotels that were built with the CBI in mind. These places are being sold right now. There's even allegations that the Moroccan hotel has been sold. There's allegations also when the deal went through that somebody went there and cleared out all the furniture and took it somewhere to some party headquarters. These are allegations. But the point is, even the Moroccan hotel, which was a gift from the government of Morocco, is being sold. Who is collecting that money? We had the Kempinski, it turned into the Cabrit Spa. And then they also building a marina. That marina there, is it part of the whatever acreage that was originally dedicated to the Kempinski? Is it something separate? Whose marina does that belong to? And finally, is there one of these projects that actually had an assessment, an environmental assessment done, especially those in the park and in our forest reserves? Did any one of these projects that Skerritt did under the CBI have such an assessment done for the protection of the site? Did he do any? Can Skerritt just get away with unlimited breaking of the law? Don't we have one law that can check him? I see it in the United States. Donald Trump is being checked right now. He's in big trouble for breaking down even the white parts of the White House. He's in big trouble right now, and courts are ruling against him. So is there a court system, some kind of legal system in this country? And if there is no such law, the next government should definitely put these laws in place. The people have to press the government to put laws in place to check these politicians. They cannot just do what they want and break laws. We have to put laws there to keep them in check, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And you want to take another call, Lambi?
Yes. Caller, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just be brief, gentlemen. Thank you. Dr. Andre, blessings to you. Simon Joseph, Dr. IP, Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, Sheridan Gregoire, and everybody else. Lambi, blessings to you all. I want to give thanks for the contribution. If more of our intellectuals were that vibrant and articulate on the issues plaguing this blessed land, I think these criminals would have already run for cover. The House of Exile, they maybe would be in the House of Exile, wherever they're heading. That letter, 2 open letters on Gregoire Nassif, can anybody read at least, even if it's one of them, pertaining to the Electoral Commission or the confirmation, all the garbage in this nation? Can somebody really articulate it and maybe dissect it and delve into it? Because a lot of people may not be aware. I'm reading it on my phone. The prints are so small, I try blowing them up. By the time I halfway, my eyes was telling me, hush my mouth and my brains. So thanks, because what I am seeing is a no law, no constitution. Dr. I.B. just articulated it there. Is the resonance or the resonating of the no law, no constitution, the multiplication, chupul. Who know what chupul's mean? I don't give a damn. Go to hell. Life and effect, wait, hang it dry. And, he, a lawless man, or you afraid in all your ass, and all kind of nastiness about Navy SEALs and snipers disappear. Linton and Tony Astafan and Roosevelt Skerritt committed a crime against Roosevelt Skerritt and pin it on Mr. Lincoln. Send police, ordered police to go at his home and search at Lincoln's home. They obediently went. They found no evidence. Computer experts in the police force. On further investigations, they find out it was Tony who hacked into Skerrit computers. Skerrit came out in Tony's defense and say, I was the one who authorized him to commit a crime on me or against me. And no dog back. No dog went to jail. No dog was charged. So somebody please read a little of Mr. Gregoire's, Mr. Nassif letter for me. Thanks for the time, and my apologies, other gentlemen. I am not. Blessings.
Yeah, thanks a lot. We'll try to see if we can make some time to read a part of that letter this evening. But Lambi, you want to take one quick call before I go?
Yes.
Don't do that.
Yeah, caller, please go ahead.
All right. So we missed that call. So former Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, let's get back to the topic, right? The question of political leadership in the Dominican and the Caribbean.
Yes. Well, good evening, Mr. G. It's a great opportunity to be on the second Global View for 2026. The month is almost gone, Mr. G. And good evening to my fellow panelists, the esteemed jurist, Dr. Irvin Andre, Simeon Joseph, and Dr. I.P. Pascal. It's a great honor and opportunity to be on the same panel with you all. And to the listening public, I say good evening. Interesting times, Mr. G. We are holding this panel discussion tonight exactly at the end of the first quarter of the century, the first quarter of the 21st century, because when 2025 ended, the first 25 years of this new century that we're in came to an end. And we've witnessed a lot of things over that period, that quarter century. I see that you stretched it back 30 years, so we're going back to 1995. And now it's a big task to give a kind of a Caribbean-wide perspective on all of these issues of leadership, and because every country in the region has its own unique reality. However, there are some strands in the governance of those countries that are similar in other countries. So that I can say in the CARICOM, for example, I'll try to give a regional perspective as much as possible while keeping a focus on Dominica. In that 25 years, we've seen some elements of a new period that was ushered in 2000. I should say that I valued that milepost we had reached in 2000, that the new millennium, and I made sure that I, as a active person in the diaspora or living in the diaspora, I needed to be in Dominica for the 1st of January 2000. Because that's the beginning of a new millennium. I will never see it again in my lifetime. And I wanted to be there. Not only did I not anticipate that there was going to be an election in Dominica in 2000, I found myself there, and the next morning I was thrust into the whole thing. I hadn't planned it. I hadn't planned to be a co-manager of Rosie Douglas' campaign, along with Atherton Martin. Just maybe that was God's work that got me to Dominica. I just come from Nigeria. I've been in Washington for a week. I say, I'm going to Dominica. I have to be there. And from then on, when I looked at what has happened, I can look back 25 years as not only a commentator here tonight, but actually an activist in that process. And and the time I spent at the UN, I spent 8 years at the UN as Dominica's ambassador to the UN. I spent 4 years at UNDP as a director for the Caribbean, the UNDP. And then I did things that, you know, as a Dominica diplomat and as, at the UN, that is lasting legacy. You don't hear about these things in our own country because this government, for whom I worked, tried to push under the carpet the work I did at the UN. But it was for Dominica. It wasn't for them specifically. Mr. G, a lot of things happened over the last 25 years. I can say that as far I was able to, being at the UN, I was able to see the other CARICOM countries close up because we were meeting as the caucus of Caribbean ambassadors at the UN. And I would learn a lot about what was happening in the individual countries from that vantage point. And then to actually meet some of these prime ministers at different conferences that I attended over time representing Dominica. I should tell you that one of the things that has disturbed me over the, especially during the reign of the current prime minister, is the fact that he doesn't really go to the UN. The Dominica's prime minister, I don't think he's been to the UN more than 5 times in the 20 years he's been prime minister. And that is a serious gap. And, you know, but anyway, I'll come back to that. But if I have to say something about leadership, I think Brother Simeon Joseph and Dr. Andre have given really great exposés on really what leadership is. I need not even waste time going into that because they've already covered it. But I would say that there are 4 things that I think that is important in leadership, political leadership that is. One is that you have to have a core set of political values. You must believe in sincerity, honesty. You must believe in some things. You know, you must be exposed to political philosophy, and especially when you want to be a prime minister. And you know, when I think of the first leaders that Dr. Andre spoke so eloquently, the founders of the Caribbean nation, out of decolonization. One of the values that these leaders had was a penchant to bring their countries to independence and build an independent nation. A nation that emerged out of a background of slavery. We in the Caribbean, we are a unique set of countries because we are probably the only subset of countries in the UN that had a slavery past. Now, Brazil has a slavery past, but it is not the ex-slaves after slavery who came to be the majority population. And Dr. Andre can correct me here, but these 14 CARICOM states, including Haiti, have a slavery past that other countries in the world didn't go through. And that must shape your value system as a politician if you're going to rule Dominica or any one of these Caribbean countries. So we reach a situation after the withdrawal of people, the first leadership, Norman Manley and Errol Barrow and Forbes Burnham and so on in Guyana, we end up with a leadership in 2000 that almost is devoid of understanding that value system that our first set of politicians emerged with. And that is one of the biggest problems in the CARICOM right now. Now, the second thing is that many of these leaders have a limited worldview. They don't understand how the world works today. They are at the UN, they're in international institutions, but they're not doing the things that they themselves sign agreements for in their own countries. Like, for example, on the human rights, all of these countries have signed the human rights commitments, human rights treaties. And they have to go before the Human Rights Council and tell the world what they're doing as far as human rights. And some of them have really bad records, like Dominica. Dominica has one of the worst human rights records in the Caribbean. And many people in Dominica are not aware of that. You understand? So that, and then the last thing that is a problem in the leadership of this crop of leaders across the Caribbean, I would have liked to accept Ralph Gonzalez, but he did some things that I will highlight, which cast a bad light on him, because he, of all of the politicians who were serving for the last 25 years, should have known better. And he did some things which were not nice. So, and that is politicians who see being in government as a means to wealth accumulation. We didn't have that kind of value system 30 years before. No, and you see, I mean, you have and that has brought a serious corruption problem in the region. And you have it in Jamaica, you have it in Dominica, you have it in St. Lucia, you have it across the board. This crop of politicians see being in power as a way to make money. Okay, so that's one of the problems I see with the leadership. But how I would say that in that 25 years, we've seen some elements. One, we've seen rotation of political parties in most of the countries. Multi-party democracies has been active and functioning in CARICOM. I can say that. Except for the two countries of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Dominica that ended up having sort of a dictatorship of a party in power, right? Of course, Haiti is falls in a different category. That one, I don't know how we solve the leadership challenges in Haiti, but here we are in that quarter century. Here, what the problems are. It's not the problem of bringing the countries to independence. Almost all of them have gotten their independence, except for those. We still have a little problem in the Caribbean in that the major powers, United States, UK, the Netherlands and France, these four powers, they are all very present and have colonies in the Caribbean. And until such time we bring that to an end, that is the next phase. We have to, the Guadeloupes and Martiniques and the St. Martin and all of them, BVI, they have to get their political status. By being a colony does not cut it in this century. And that is the next phase of the integration that must happen in the region, and also to bring in the Dominican Republic and Cuba into CARICOM. These are the big challenges I see ahead in the next 25 years. That's going to happen. So where we are facing the challenges of food security and the fact that we're not producing enough food for people. Our personal security is becoming a challenge across the region with illicit weapons coming from United States, small arms and light weapons that's in the hands of people in villages. I mean, I'm from Grand Bay, Dominica, and in Grand Bay, there are people who have assault weapons. That is, and I know, I have names. But I'll tell you, I have more information than the police. If they don't know where these weapons are, and I can come there on vacation and learn things, then something is wrong with our personal security system. So, and that's not just Dominica, that's across the board. We have the smallest homicide rate in the region. And that's good, but not good enough, because some of these killings that are going on in Dominica need to stop. And I put it at a failure of the police. Rather than deal with crime properly, they are out trying to beat protesters who are protesting for their political rights in Dominica and other places, but more in Dominica, because what has happened in Dominica over the last 20 years I'll tell you, defies reason. And then the problem of climate change. The climate change challenge is huge. I'll tell you a little joke. The first time I raised with the cabinet of Dominica that climate change was going to be a problem for Dominica, that was in 2008. Some of the ministers in the cabinet told me they don't believe in climate change. They don't believe in this. I said, are you serious? I said, and I said something that really made them upset with me. And I said, I don't know what you all are reading, you all as policymakers, but if you're not reading about climate change, at least get your permanent secretaries to go and read about that, because that's going to be a problem for you. And, so that was in 2008. Maria happened in 2017. I'd been warning them as early as 2008 that stuff is going to come down the pike, partners, and, well, they got rid of me, and then they continued and just made a lot of mistakes. And then the energy security is a problem across the region. And they need to really keep ramping up, moving away from fossil fuel generated electricity, because that is no longer in vogue. You have to move away from fossil fuel for electricity as the first step. Then you will deal with transport later, but deal with that first one. So these, Mr. G, these are some of the things across the region, but I now wanted to sort of say a little bit specific to Dominica, because the audience here is really focused on Dominica. Now, Dominica has been in the news a lot in the US. It's because President Trump has put sanctions on Dominica. 3 of them, 3 major sanctions. And I want to go a little bit into them because, see, Dominica has been on a sliding slope into bad governance and hustling internationally. It's not, we don't have a good image in the international system, and that worries me, Mr. G, having been a diplomat for the government of Dominica. But I'm no longer that, and I just let them try to sort out their little problems now. But they have many, many problems to solve, the current government. In fact, I would say that the Prime Minister probably cannot sleep, because when he sleeps, he dreams about Secretary of State Rubio and President Trump, because they have their boots on his neck, and not him alone. His good friend Gaston Brown in Antigua, the 2 guys. In Washington, they call them the double duo. So these guys are facing a monumental challenge. And now I mentioned that the 2 parties that have been dominant there, the rest you have rotation. And now you have, in 2025, we had 6 elections in the CARICOM. Of the 6 elections, it brought 3 governments were, the 3 parties were defeated in the election. So you have 3 new governments in the CARICOM. Namely, so you had elections in Guyana, you had elections in Belize, you had elections in Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, and there's the 6th one, St. Lucia. So 3 new governments, Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, and St. Vincent and Grenadines. I forgot to mention it. So the character of CARICOM is changing. And I think it will change further. I believe that there will be some new governments that will come into power in 2026, 2027. I don't know which ones they will be, but that's what I see, Mr. G. Now, it's important for there to be free and fair elections. Dominica has struggled with not having a free and fair election. And that's gone on from I would say from 2009 election, 2014 election, 2019 election. The opposition didn't participate in 2022 when that snap election was called. It was supposed to be a reset election, but I think it was a deset election. Because what it has done, it has not... You have a bunch of people in government, they don't have a clue of what the hell is going on. They say they're in cabinet. What does it really mean to be in cabinet? And then to say, oh, the ayes have it in parliament. These are people who, some of them were not even elected. By default, nobody challenged them and they end up winning the election by default. You don't have the support of the majority of people in Dominica. That's the reality. We have a minority government. And some of these so-called PAL reps, they have never had any involvement in community activities before. They end up being minister of this and minister of that. Well, I wish them well, but I'm telling you, that system of governance is moribund and it's on its way to collapse. Now, after we had that stint with Rosie Douglas, didn't last long. The Lord took him away from us 8 months after. Then Pierre Charles replaced him, tried to stabilize the situation, and I must say he never got the credit that he deserved to get. He was a politician of the last century, frankly, and he tried to do things like that in the 21st century, and his colleagues, they gave him a hard time. They drove him to his grave. That's really what happened. And then enters the current man who is the prime minister now. I had a chance to work with him. I had the chance to see him very early in the when he was a candidate in 2000. I discerned a certain arrogance on his part, and he just grew more and more arrogant in power when he got it. I would say, you know, he's a smart guy. Some things that he has done boggles my mind, but you know, he's been in power for 20 years. The sad problem is that he's not dealt with his succession. He has no plans for succession. He wants to be a dictator for the rest of his life, and that's going to put him in a lot of problems, not only with the people of Dominica, who are increasingly getting dissatisfied with his rule, and he doesn't know that it's time for him to pack up and retire. So that's a problem. He established one China policy, good thing, but I think that he got the short end of the stick, because what he asked the Chinese for to break the relationship was not that much money when you think about it. Not $100 million for Dominica to switch. You know, I mean, that's little money. That's chump change. I told him, and I can say that publicly, Pierre Charles wanted to change that relationship with Taiwan, but he was very measured in his approach to that. He said to me, start talking to the Chinese, and I did at the UN. And then I said to the Chinese, you know, if you want us to make that shift, you have to spend $500 million. And they said, yes, we can do that. And do you know what we wanted from them? We wanted a deep water port at Portsmouth. We wanted an airport. We wanted land to put factories. Give that to the Chinese folk. Tell them we want factories here, partner. You know, and we want 100% generation of electricity from renewable means. We want to set the country on a new direction. But what they did when they went to China to negotiate with the Chinese for 21 hours, they got very little return. So there's nothing to speak about. Then they shift the development strategy from agriculture to tourism, when it should be both. You cannot do one and not do the other. Then CBI began to grow when they got visa-free into Shenzhen. And then all of a sudden, the mantra became, If not CBI, tell me what? Well, we now find out, if not CBI, tell me what? You see those sanctions that President Trump has put on Dominica? That is what CBI has brought you. And tell me, if not CBI, tell me what now? So here's the problem they have. And Mr. G, I'm gonna try to finish because I don't want to be too long, because I know I'm watching the time, and then also people want the call. Here is what the sanctions from the US has brought to our country. Number one, travel ban. That means a discouraging of people, American citizens, to travel to Dominica. Travel ban. We might end up having flights, direct flights from New York and from Miami, empty, because Americans are now maybe afraid to go to Dominica. So that's one. Then the second thing is that suspension of visas. First, we heard it was non-immigrant visas, and a non-immigrant visa is a visitor's visa, a student visa, an exchange student visa called a J1. Those visas, that's non-immigrant. So we thought it was just non-immigrant. But then the US slapped a suspension of immigrant visas on Dominica. So these are the free sanctions. Now, the immigrant visas is worrying, Mr. G, because it means that if your family had filed for you, you know, your family is in the diaspora, they file for American diaspora, they file for you to get a green card. You might have been waiting for up to 8 years to get that visa. That visa call, the call for your green card in Barbados. Now, after you've waited 8 years and they gave you an appointment for 2026, now there is a suspension of visas. You cannot get that green card until that visa ban is lifted. And we have no telling when that will be. Then we get hit with another sanction, which is the suspension of immigrant visas. So if you were up for, you are here in the US, no, I mean suspension of visas for well, what it works out is, if you are natural, you are here, you have a green card, and you apply for naturalization, and you got it and it's gonna be in 2026. That is off. You're not going to get naturalization. It's suspended for all people. So these are things that these sanctions, when they say, oh, I heard the Prime Minister saying, oh, it's just about the residency requirement they're concerned about. I want him to focus on this free sanction. So it means that our immigrants in the US cannot become naturalized this year in 2026 because of this suspension of citizenship for them. And if you've been waiting for 8 years for your call to get your green card so you can come here, that is also suspended. So that is what CBI has brought us. Why did CBI bring us there? For a number of reasons, Mr. G. You see, I'm told that Dominica has the highest number of people with economic citizens who are in fake names. That's one. The second thing, we've been selling diplomatic passports over the years, and by that, and moving it one step further, selling immunity. We did that with an Iranian guy. And by the way, I'm hearing that there are a lot of Iranian Revolutionary Guards with our passports. That's how they travel. They travel on our passport. These are Iranians who could never get a passport or enter anywhere. They can enter with our passports, and many of them have our passports. So then we have a bad human rights record. You simply have to go to the Human Rights Council and read the reports about what they were grilling our foreign minister about our human rights. firing tear gas in villages like Salisbury, firing tear gas after protesters who were protesting for electoral reform, having scuffles with the protesters last March. All of these things affect us. And then the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights wrote a damning report in April of 2025. I want Dominicans to read that report. That is the record of your government in print. That's not Dominicans talking. This is observers of what is going on in your country, in our country. And that's why I always signal to the police that what they're doing, intimidating political people, is unacceptable behavior and illegal and criminal. And the last thing I want to say too I wanted to say something, Mr. G, about the egregious behavior of some of these leaders in our sub-region on a particular issue of Western Sahara. Western Sahara people is the last colony in Africa to get their independence. They've been fighting for it since 1975. Now, just like we were a colony of UK, they are a colony of Spain. There are only two countries in Africa that were colonized by Spain: Western Sahara and Equatorial Guinea. Equatorial Guinea did get their independence. Western Sahara, up to this day, they're fighting for their independence. Why? Because Spain did not complete their responsibilities as the power that colonized them. So then when Spain just one day packed up and left Western Sahara, and then Morocco and Mauritania, the two neighboring countries, they moved in with troops saying that's their territory. It went before the International Court of Justice that's not your territory, and these people deserve their political independence. And one of the failures of the UN is that the UN has not been able to hold the referendum that they've been supposed to have held since 1991. So here comes Morocco looking for friends. They find Dominica, and that was after my tenure. I would not talk to the Moroccans. I am an African nationalist, and I will not deal with the Moroccans at all. So I never talked to them. I told them, look, if you want to have relations with us, you give independence to Western Sahara and get out of their land. As soon as I left, my successor, Vince Henderson, became the poster boy for the Moroccans. And they use him and the other OECS countries, who all are on the UN Decolonization Committee. That's the committee dealing with the independence of the rest of the countries that have to get their political status. And Dominica got the other OECS countries. These are the only countries in the CARICOM who are on that committee. The Moroccans bought them all hook, line, and sinker. And the last one to fall into that rut was Ralph Gonzalez. And he knows, I've told him my mind about this. But I'm saying it publicly now. These 6 countries betrayed this liberation struggle and the independence of Western Sahara. And look at what they got in Dominica in return. A hotel that's sinking in the swamp of Portsmouth, the Moroccan hotel. Mr. G, I will rest my case.
All right. Thanks a lot, former Ambassador Crispin Gregoire. Dr. Andre, we are sort of running out of time. I wanted to give you an opportunity to make your further comments, your further remarks on the whole question of political leadership in Dominica and the Caribbean and the impact, the consequences on the lives of the people of the region. You need to unmute your mic.
Okay, thank you. I thank the panelists for the excellent presentations and so on. Obviously, we could spend the whole night talking about this issue. With respect to Dominica, the rot became evident in 2000. It's somewhat ironic because Rosie won. Rosie's honesty and integrity cannot be questioned. But it is in the formulation of his government that it became evident that those on whom he relied upon to form a government, they had a totally different perspective. I remember it was Arthur Martin who wrote, perhaps in 2004 or 5, an article in one of the newspapers saying that 2 of the so-called junior ministers demanded a ministry or else they would go to the other side. I remember also that there were demands of cash from them. I also remember when one person crossed the floor after God spoke to them, God probably told her to demand $150,000 from Rosie, and that was the price Rosie had to pay for her to cross the floor. But it became even more evident in 2004. You see, typically in Dominica's history, the annals of Dominican history, when we think about 2004, we think about what they did to Pero. We think about Pero's death.
Simeon, hello, one second. Simeon, could you mute your mic?
Yes, and we think about the ascendancy of the prime minister. But what was even more egregious, Edward Oliver Leblanc passed, somewhat significantly. I was at that funeral. I think I wrote a book on him, if I recall correctly. And at that funeral, some of these acolytes and lackeys and sycophants were saying, even before the man was lowered into the grave, we will not be like him. We will not die like him without anything. And that has been the consistent thread in Dominica's history since then. And that takes us to Desbranches, because we have to challenge what some of these acolytes and apologists are saying. There's an argument which is being advanced by a number of the local intelligentsia who support this nonsense and others. The argument is this: so what? I call it so what. And we heard a version of it sometime last week. So what if stones are being removed from Desbranches? The colonial authorities did it in late 1950s in building the Melville Hall Airport. But this is a very dishonest argument. Were there any EAI's prerequisites to do any project of that size? Was Melville Hall of the same magnitude and size as to the airport being built as we speak? When that Melville Hall Airport was built, Dominica was not an independent country. Since we became independent, Dominicans gained a stake in their own country. And at what price? What price does Dominica have to pay for an international airport? The destruction of village life, the destruction of the environment. Is there any concern that this so-called mining for stones, and anybody would be a total fool to believe that, is taking place right close to a conservation or a preserved area of Dominica? No concern whatever. But there is no concern about the integrity of those who are involved in this project. Do any search about the Chinese and the mining or the quarrying activities in Africa. It's a damning indictment as to the total and wanton disregard for the environment. Look at those who've sanctioned this. They do not come to this table with clean hands. They come with corrupt hands. And isn't it strange, passing strange, Mr. G, that they're looking for big boulders? They're ready to flatten a whole mountain in an area where there was some indication there was copper. These apologists, they don't worry about this, because they know it's a dishonest bag. Well, let's leave it at this. It's a dishonest argument. It's as simple as that. What is the price for an international airport in Dominica? The destruction of the pristine language, the very identity of the country that you're trying to sell and market as part of your tourism package. But listen to what Crispin has just said. Look at how Trump has changed the paradigm. Ask yourself how many hundreds of thousands of Americans will be flocking to Dominica on these international jets. We are destroying the landscape to build an international airport, and you may not even have a plane coming in with 20 people, let alone 50 or 100. So it raises the question, to what end are you embarking on that type of destruction? Who would you believe? Those who have a vested interest in becoming an apologist for this government, or those persons who have much to lose? Think of Nasio. You think Nasio is going to that place every day so he can get a gig at the World Creole Music Festival? Huh? Don't you think he has more credibility? You think IP would abandon his patients and go there so he can get a gig at the Chinese whatever hospital? Look at Athi Mate, one of the only ministers who resigned from government in June or July 2000 on principle. Some persons may have a divergent opinion with respect to the whaling thing. He found himself there because he has much to lose. He could do with some passport money for his hotel too, but they're making real sacrifices. They're not doing this to gain a few dollars more. They're not doing this to ingratiate themselves on the political directory. So that the choice is clear. Those who support this, they do it because of a certain degree of altruism, because of a certain belief as to what leadership should be. Leadership is not someone who is locked in a prison of his or her own greed or narcissism. Leadership is thinking beyond the box in the interest of your own people, not selling out to the highest bidder. Why are we not seeing those hidden EIAs, or what the hell you call them? Why are they not showing it to us? What do they have to hide? And then you want to accept the drivel that they're telling you, or we're looking for boulders? Crispin talked about the hotels. Waste of money. The only hotel built with these types of fund, and I'm not talking, as I said, the one Fort Young is probably an exception, is the Morocco Hotel. And the only part of it that has full occupancy is the basement, because all the Tutulu crabs from Purple Turtle has found a home in the basement of that hotel. So it's a waste of money. And what do we get from Morocco? We got the hotel. We know what happened to it. We also got, what was it again? Cement. Was it cement? I think it was cement, you know. What happened to that cement? You had acolytes selling the cement, you know, cement that should be given free of charge to Dominicans, selling it on the cover of darkness to persons. Again, the story is clear. The only persons, or the major persons, or disproportionately those who benefit from the passport sales, are lackeys. The same thing in terms of that type of activity. The same thing in terms of parrots. The same thing in terms of the $2 million given to the government by the US to build a naval facility at Capuchin. The same thing with respect to the $10,000, $10 million. And I should stop here, Mr. G, to give somebody else a chance. How sad is it to see some members of the Kalinara territory being the biggest apologists for activities that are ruining their way of life and the development of their own category? They're selling their souls. Now, don't ask me for what. They're selling the souls, the life of their community and the life of their people, as opposed to promoting it. In fact, sadly, as I've said before on one other program, I'll end right here, our esteemed president went to China. What did she say? Bring them in, Gasso. 3,000, that's okay, we can deal with that. Despite the history of oppression and discrimination that these folk have had to endure throughout their history. It's slavery all over again. Those chieftains, some of them in Africa, got some point, for a little chain of beads, or little cheap firearm. And that is what we have to get rid of, this mentality that makes us condone the giving away of that we should be cherishing the most, our island and what it has to offer for our people. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Andre. I'll be coming back to you for closing remarks, but let me just go to IP for your closing remarks. You want to unmute your mic. Right.
I'll just make it short. What do I say? I think when we have challenges, or whatever, they usually they have immediate solutions or immediate suggestions, and short term, medium term, and long term. So I will end with that approach. I said in the short term, in the immediate short term, our present political leadership is so incompetent. It's become a liability rather than an asset to the survival and future prosperity of this island. And once upon a time, the head of that political leadership had the privilege of the goodwill of the majority of Dominicans when we said, give the young man a chance. That was some, 2 decades ago. And then it went from there to, if it's not Mr. Skerrit, who? And I foresee, I don't foresee, that's what I get on the ground now from the majority of people I interact with. And I think I trust them. I trust what they say. They mean it. And right now, for the majority of them, it's anybody else but Mr. Skerrit. So I think the short-term approach to the nature of the political leadership we have in Dominica now is that we should see the back of Mr. Skerrit and his government. I say that without apology or fear of whatever. For the future political leadership of this country, we need to have some increased possibilities for accountability, and determine what criteria we use for ministerial position, and something maybe a little limited terms or something of that sort. And the rest of it, then I'll leave it to other Dominican patriots and the Almighty. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, IP, for your closing remarks. Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, your closing remarks. You want to unmute your mic? Yep.
Yeah, Mr. G, I'll follow my colleagues and be brief. I'd like to say that we have entered a new political era with Donald Trump, and he has really shaked up the world, and he has shaked up the CARICOM, and he has put serious capability for use of force in our region. I see going forward a competition between China and the US, and Dominica is going to be one of the theaters of that competition. So we are beginning the second quarter of the century in a very interesting new changing reality in the world. We are seeing that the US is poised now to exert the big stick in the Caribbean and South America and Central America. The US is, what I see emerging is a world where a new world order, and the world order of the last 80 years from World War II to now, that order is coming quickly to an end, and a new order is emerging, And we in the Caribbean have to adapt to that new order. And that new order is that the free world powers, United States, People's Republic of China, and the Russian Federation, these free powers, what we see emerging is a carving of the geographical space around them, what they call their sphere of influence. So what is happening with the Caribbean and Latin America is that the US is now flexing its muscles as it's being challenged by China, who is active very much in the US backyard. The US is now acting in an aggressive manner. And you saw what happened in Venezuela. That's not settled yet. That is still an unfolding crisis. I just hope it doesn't get out of hand. Now, of course, Venezuela is our neighbor, so we want an orderly transition and hope that it doesn't become a civil conflict or civil war. Prime Minister Skerritt in his press conference last week, talking about the sanctions and the fact that he has to take some deportees. He up to now he hasn't told us how many, and he signed an agreement. It's time I'm calling on the Prime Minister to tell the Dominican people how many deportees he's taking, because up to now he has told us nothing about that. Antigua was brave enough to tell us it's 10. Tell us how many and what are the arrangements for how these people are going to settle and where they're going to settle. So that's it. He called for a unity of the Dominican people to face the onslaught of these sanctions from the US. I would say that's a good call. I like that call for unity, but it must start with him. And the first thing that I want him to do on that unity call is to end all of these court cases against protesters that's before the court. If you really want unity, Mr. Skerritt, defuse the political time bomb that you have created in Dominica. So that is what I would like to say to you tonight, that our country is in crisis because you and your colleagues brought us to where we are, and it's incumbent on you to take the lead to deal with it, and this suffering that the Dominican people are now facing, especially those in the American and part of the diaspora, it's your fault and your government's fault, sir. So if you want the rest of the country to help you deal with this, end these cases against people for political rights. Mr. G, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ambassador Gregoire. Now, do you know social scientist Simeon Joseph for your closing remarks?
Well, thank you, Mr. Gregoire, and a pleasure being there with Irvin and Crispin and Dr. IP and yourself and the Dominicans who are listening. For me, I would end with what I would call an anomaly, and to say that we in the Caribbean and Dominica are on the cusp of a new horizon, the dawn of a new day. But what day it is, I don't know, because it's all obvious to all that when we were expecting the dawn of a rising sun, we may be seeing, of course, instead a setting sun. And so the hopes and the aspirations of many Dominicans and Caribbean people that would have been born into years past of the hard gains of our former inspiring leaders seems to be coming to naught. Unlike Crispin, who spoke about a new era, I have come to surmise that the world has transitioned from the mid-20th century, from what we would have as many brutal dictators and fascists ruling the world. It seems to me that whereas in Europe and Asia and Latin America, back in the 20th century, we would have many dictatorial and fascist leaders ruling those countries, that this era of fascism has given birth in the Caribbean. Because if you look at the tendencies and the directions of many of the Caribbean leaders, you see that's how we are going. Bertrand Russell in 1940 said something to that effect. And he says, to create a fascist movement, you need an energetic leader. Just look at our leaders in the Caribbean today. With a group of people who possess free time, brutality, and stupidity. And he said, then after that, you would fascinate the fools with emotional excitement and muzzle the intelligent with terrorism. I think that's what we're seeing today. That we have some kind of leadership who are totally against intellectual thought, progressive thinking, and in order to maintain their new fascist status quo, they fight against every progressive thinking and person and organization there can be. We have seen it with the dismantling of village councils. We have seen it with the dismantling of progressive entities, and we have particularly seen it with progressive organizations, trade unions, business communities who would therefore, in the past, would lead the movements of people, have all been consumed and subsumed by the new political elite of today. And you know, they will tell you there are basically three characteristics that separate fascism from democracy: power, governance, and justice. And when we look at power, we see that we've moved from medieval times when we would have kings to modern democracy, which gave people the right to vote. And so power comes through popularity. And we forget that throughout history, dictatorships have been the norm. But it seems now that the free world is shrinking. Because according to a recent study, for the first time in 2024, autocracies outnumbered democracies. And that's a fact. And it means, therefore, it seems to me that many of our leaders in the Caribbean fall within that category. And the trick that they play is one, to spread a lot of disinformation to mislead people, to sow a lot of distrust among people, to reinforce a condition sort of us. And so that is how they seem to want to assume power. That leads to the kind of governance we have today. You know, we've shifted from dictators to democracies. We have democracies, which speaks of the governance of everybody. But gradually, we see a sense of anarchy coming in that has replaced governance. And so what we see is people are more enabled to compromise and to rule by brute force, you know, and they think that, and for this, where the stronger kills the weaker. And my greatest concern when we think about leadership and governance today is that I think all of this is bringing a serious threat to justice. The former dictator of Peru, Benavides, said, "I am here for my friends, everything, and for my enemies, the law." And that's how he ruled. It seems to me that's how our leaders today in the Caribbean are ruling, that they will use their positions of power for their friends, for those whom they know, for those whom they associate with, and anybody who does not support them, they will throw all kind of vicissitudes and the law and every system of governance against them. Where there is no equal protection in the law anymore, which is what an offshoot of democracy, where people are being separated more and more into two groups, us and them, and where there is a growing sense of selective justice and political victimization. That is how I'd want to end tonight. And I think I want to end with those three thoughts. What kind of justice, governance, and power are we seeing in our Caribbean and particularly in Dominica today? Is the power that we experience a democratic one? Right? Is the governance that we experience a governance that is democratic and acting on behalf of the people? And is the justice that we are encountering one where people feel that there is equal opportunity before the law. In closing, I would say, and I would surmise, that all three pillars of good leadership and democracy have gone to the dogs. They have been washed down by the river. And I will end my program tonight, my contribution tonight, as I ended my last program, that based on the failure of leadership and governance in Dominica, the only solution and the best advice I can give the government in Dominica today is to tender the letter of resignation, get off the backs of the Dominican people, move away from the political landscape, and give Dominica and Dominicans a chance to breathe freely. They have wasted their legacy, they have exploited their opportunity, and there's nothing more they can do for the productive advancement and development of the Dominican people. The sooner they realize that and they get out of the way so that Dominicans can have a new lease on life and that Dominica can experience a new era of prosperity, is to get themselves out of the reins of power by any means necessary, as using the wordings that which they came in, okay? By any means necessary, so that Dominica can begin to prosper, have good governance, and a brighter future in the future. Go, get out of there.
Thanks a lot, Simeon. Dr. Andre, you have the final word.
Well, once again, thank you. I'll probably take off from where Simeon left off. If it was so easy, if it was that the leadership would be stricken by a pangs of conscience, some type of epiphany, and say, "Gosh, so let me go back to Dubai with all that money I've stolen and hidden," but it ain't going to be. So I'm going to focus on the reaction or the responsibility of persons of conscience and moral turpitude in response to that unrelenting despotism that we have to encounter right now. I think we all know that injustice flourishes where the morally upright maintain their silence. I think Martin Luther King put it another way. What did he say? He said, "Those who in a moment of moral crisis maintain their silence will be very happy in the hottest place in hell." Now, I don't know anything about the hottest place in hell. I know what will happen to me when I put my hand on the stove. But that is what should motivate and animate and encourage and incite Dominicans, note the word please, incite, to protect their space in this world of today. The simple fact of the matter is the corruption of greed and selfishness and narcissism is just too great. Nobody is going to have this epiphany. They will only live where the honest and upwardly moral, upright people say enough is enough. You don't have to be in Minnesota, you know. You can just be right here, right there in Dominica. If you're not prepared to say enough is enough, if you're going to stay silent when some turncoat trained in China is talking and saying, "We're going to flatten this mountain," in an elusive search for rocks. Well, that's what they say, but it's a complete lie. If we cannot say enough is enough, then when? What is life? What is the purpose of your existence? What are you living for? What are you going to bequeath your children? They can't go to States to study, apparently, based on the developments. They can't go for a visit, and so on. The walls are closing in. This prison that we've created, our leaders have created, are closing in on Dominicans. And very soon they'll have no option. Save yourselves, save your souls, stand up and be counted. And that is the message I'm leaving this evening. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Andre. And let me just, it's just left for me to thank all the wonderful people who stayed with us on the radio, on the internet, on Facebook, and on YouTube. A huge shout out to all of you guys out there. Thanks for staying with us until this time. And then, of course, to say goodnight to Crispin and IP and Simeon and Dr. Andre and Lambi and Sherwin. So, gentlemen, good night. Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
night.
Take care, guys.
All right,
Great
take care.
program. Thank you.
Yeah, good night.
Okay.
The Global View on Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from. Understanding our past. Embracing our present. Charting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating poverty. Embracing justice, peace, and togetherness.